and welcome to the video. Within this video guide I will be sharing my tried and tested recipe and methods for brewing my European lager recipe, which I am calling Golden European Lager. This is an easy and economic recipe to brew and an easy one to ferment, as it uses the simply awesome Novalager yeast, making it suitable for ambient temperatures without pressure if you wish. Let's get to it. I will now take you through the steps in order. Here is a sneak preview of my recipe's vital statistics. This recipe offers an approximate 4.7% ABV and offers a very refreshing European lager that is perfect as an easy drinking sessionable thirst quencher all year round. This recipe, like all of my shared recipes, is written by me and can be found in full within the video's description, which is underneath the video window when viewed on a desktop computer. Like all of my shared recipes, this recipe is very tried and tested, so brew with confidence. You will also find a link to the full recipe on Brewfather, which can be used free of charge with some restrictions. For the very best of results, and so that you're actually brewing the recipe as intended, I strongly suggest that your initial steps will be to convert the recipe before ordering in your ingredients. I have an easy guide to doing this with Brewfather on my channel as shown on screen now. Within this video, this recipe is being brewed using a Gen 4 Brewzilla 65 to a small batch volume, as frankly I'm a little overflowed with beer right now. However, I am sharing the recipe to the classic volume of 19 litres or approximately 5 US liquid gallons. Naturally, you will need to make your own choices here, and as part of the conversion process, this recipe can be scaled and shaped to suit your own brewing system and volume requirements. Recipe conversion is an essential part of the initial process for any shared recipe, but thankfully the conversion is easy when you know how. I also strongly recommend, for the best of results, that you plan your water profile ahead. After all, beer is mostly water and its balance is very important. Though you will be given a pass if you're a beginner on your first brews, I would still strongly suggest that you invest some time into this as soon as possible. The Brewfather brewing software has very good documentation on water changes and makes the process much easier than you would imagine, so just go for it. Shown on screen is the water profile that I preferred in developing this recipe, which is naturally found on Brewfather. This water profile is from Pilsner and its water is known to be soft, which allows more hops for flavour without any sharpness. I used this water profile while I was developing this recipe with great results and recommend that you use this one too. Let's now move on to the brew. I have preheated my mash water to the first step temperature, which is now shown on screen, and I'm now gradually adding the grain for this recipe and stirring in as I go. The very best tip anyone can give you for brewing is that you should never be in a hurry when adding your grain prior to starting the actual mash in step. In fact, I suggest you do as I do and literally enjoy the relaxation of gradually stirring the grain in, ensuring that every grain is wet and that you have no clumps. The mash temperature used here is on the higher side as to balance this recipe, but that does not mean that we have a high final gravity, as Brewfather still predicts a finish of 1.008, which is certainly on the dry side. Let's now look at this recipe's grain bill while I show you the changing look of the mash as we go through the mash in to mash out. The grain bill here is mostly extra pale Pilsner malt at 80%. Various maltsters sell their own version of this, but basically you want to go for the lightest Pilsner malt that you can obtain. I'm using Weyermann's version, which has a colour of a mere 3 EBC, which equates to just over 1.5 SRM. Naturally, this is a design choice that I have made to make this one look extra golden. A small warning here though, if your brewing system has old style heating elements rather than ultra low watt density elements, then you will be adding some extra colour in, sadly, but it's not going to change the flavour, which I believe should be the main concern anyway. If you can use Weyermann's Extra Pale Premium Pilsner Malt, then I would certainly recommend it, as it has some light honey notes that will be picked up in such a recipe by people with sensitive enough taste buds, and really works very nicely for the overall flavour profile. Other than this, our Pilsner Malt here is providing the bulk of our fermentables, and is also a canvas of flavour coming from other sources. As we move away from the initial minutes of the mash, at around the 10-minute mark, the wort starts to take on elements of the sought-after golden look, as you can see here. Supplementing this grain bill's flavour, we also have Vienna malt at 15%, which adds in some malty sweetness and potentially some extra light honey and nutty notes. When I was first developing this recipe, I was actually using Munich malt, which adds in some extra malty flavour compared to Vienna. The difference is certainly not large, but I ended up going the Vienna route instead, as it just sat a little better flavour-wise. I would recommend that you do the same the first time, but if you find that you would have liked a little bit more malty flavour, then certainly go with Munich the next time. Then finally, at 5% of our grist, we have Carapils, also known as Carafoam. This malt has a high amount of dextrins and proteins, which allows it to improve the beer's head and also make it more stable, plus it adds in some extra body, which is really my reason to use it in fact. Once the mash was finished, I lifted the grain basket and set the system to ramp up to the boil. I then performed a gradual sparge by hand to rinse through the remaining sugars and to top up the volume. I know that a small amount of people prefer to skip this step, but my taste buds notice a negative difference in doing this, so I continue to sparge. Let's now move on to the boil stage. Brewing a small batch like this in a larger brewing system certainly does make for very fast heating and thus a reduced brew time. So it was not long before I found my wort at a boil, and I started to give the protein head a good stir to allow all of these solids to drop down and also to prevent a boil over. Once this was done, I then started the boil timer. Let's now look at the boil schedule. As per usual, I'm using the modern boil time of 30 minutes. If you are new to my channel or this concept, then do check out the video now shown on screen as it explains all the details. For this recipe I'm using Saaz, which is one of the 4 original noble hops. Saaz has a classic and very distinctive earthy, herbal and spicy flavouring effect, and some would say makes a lager a real lager. At least in Europe anyway. Saaz hops are not strong in effect they are quite mild, which makes them perfect for a European lager, which is a more subtle and delicate style, adding to its drinkability. This recipe has its first addition at the start of the boil for some bitterness, and the late additions focus on flavour and aroma. If you brew a 1 keg batch, then you will need just 50 grams or 1.76 ounces of Saaz in total. Even with a 30-minute boil, this is a very nicely economic recipe to brew. Before the end of the boil, I was sure to sanitize my counterflow chiller by running boiling hot wort through it for a couple of minutes via the system's pump. Counterflow chillers are my favourite way to cool, and this one is one that I've repurposed from my Brewfather G30. I then started to transfer a small amount of the wort into my fermenter before pitching my Novalager yeast. According to all data from Lallemand, Novalager is recommended for use at up to 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit, but I have discovered that in actual fact it remains clean and still fairly neutral at up to 23 degrees Celsius without pressure. In this case, I fermented at 23 degrees Celsius from the beginning and was really happy with the end results, plus the fact that the fermentation was actually over in just 2 days. Now let me be very clear here that I have not done this many times, so I cannot fully vouch for it, but I did speak to Lallemand and they told me that this fits well with their experiences too. Naturally, if you decide to ferment this one under pressure, then you can take this yeast even higher in temperature and also enjoy some extra crispness. It has to be said though that there is really no need to go much higher than 23 degrees Celsius with this yeast when under pressure, as the speed of this yeast is incredibly fast already. Also remember that when using pressure to not exceed 1 bar or 14.5 psi as a maximum for the secured benefit of your yeast's health. Let's now move on to the finished beer from this batch. This beer has been under 12 psi of pressure, which is 0.83 bars for this time, and I'm also using pressure for this serving too. I decided to clear this one as well using gelatin, and it has dropped very bright as you can see. Shortly I'll give you my tasting notes, which were written at the 4-week point, which is when this beer really comes into a better drinking experience, though for the very best taste I would suggest waiting 6 weeks or more if you can. Here are my tasting notes, starting with aroma. Aroma. This beer has a light and easy aroma with a refreshing spicy Saaz quality to it. Flavour. On entry this one is very light and easy with a nice crisp taste that is mellow and very smooth. At the finish you have a mellow amount of Saaz spice. Those with more sensitive taste palates may detect a little honey and nutty qualities in the background, but all will pick up a little maltiness that is in balance with the hops. And here are my notes. This beer works really well when paired with food, be it hot and spicy or simply a hot summer's day barbecue. It is hard to find food that this does not work with for sure. Here is my final impression. In keeping with a European lager, this beer is subtle but still flavourful and very much an easy drinking session beer that is especially appreciated during the warmer months of the year. So there you have it. Do let myself and the community know what you think of this video guide, and also I'd love to hear your tasting notes once you have brewed this one and let it condition for a reasonable time. I do hope that you found this video useful, informative and interesting. If so, why not consider liking and subscribing? For further support you can join the channel's Facebook group, and if you would like to support the channel then check out the channel's merchandise store, as all profits go back into the channel. Until next time, happy brewing!